let's discuss a thought process, a way to look at the body if you're in pain, let's say. So let's talk about shoulder pain as an example. So let's say you've got shoulder pain and you've tried a whole bunch of things to help yourself. By the way, we could talk about this with the hip or with the knee or whatever else, but we'll just talk shoulder for now. So what if you've gotten images, and what if they decided, hey, nothing's wrong with any of the stuff here in the shoulder? So, you know, they've looked at things like tendons and some muscles and some shoulder joint capsules and a whole bunch of stuff, and they've determined, your doctor's determined, there's really nothing that conclusively tells us that what we see is causing your pain. You know, conversely, maybe they say, oh, you know, you have a torn biceps tendon, or you tore the joint capsule, or there's this huge spur. You know, maybe sometimes we see things like that, right? And by the way, there's times that even with that structural damage, still doesn't explain why you may be feeling pain. But anyway, so let's say that we've ruled all that out. Structurally, we just can't be certain that that's the cause of your pain. So now what do? Let's just look at this objectively for a second. So you may see someone and they may be biased towards seeing the body in a certain way that they may conclude that they know the cause of your pain. So let's just say someone says, oh, move your shoulder, you know, you can't move your shoulder, and you say, oh, it hurts, and they say, oh, this is really tight, this is restricted, because that's what they're looking at. They're trained, or whatever it is they've been trained in, to look for things that are tight. And you know, we can start asking ourselves, how are they really concluding it's tight? By how it feels when they touch something. This feels too tight, because look, I mean, you've got some people, just think about this, people that are in great shape, right? You touch them, they feel kind of firm. You can almost say tight. If I move my arm back here in my chest, my pecs, I describe them as, as far as this hand goes, when I feel it, I'd say it feels tight. So I don't know how they're determining it's tight or not. How else can people look at this and draw conclusions? They could say, hey, there's fascia in here, and I think that there's an adhesion here, and that's why when you get here it's causing you pain, because that adhesion's not letting you move, and if that adhesion wasn't here, you'd be able to move and there wouldn't be pain. You know, so you have to ask yourself, well, how are they determining that? How have they taken some kind of image? How are they looking at it? How can they tell that? Again, we can have a whole other conversation about where the science is today and the perspective of, can fascia really cause those kind of problems or not? And I can share some links to some current thought processes and as to where the industry really is concerning that. But anyway, okay, there's this fascia thing let's just say. Here's what I want to do now. Let's look at other things that are going on, okay? Let's just objectively state other things that are happening. So here's something else. When you go to move this arm, and let's say you move it, you're like, oh, it hurts when I move it. Let's just acknowledge muscles are what's moving it. You know, so we can just say, hey, what muscle is responsible for lifting this arm up? And we could say it's the deltoid, the medial deltoid. And you're hurting when you lift your arm, and the medial deltoid plays a major role in lifting your arm. Therefore, something must be wrong with the medial deltoid. We could draw that. You can kind of logically hear how I came up with that. All right, but we still have that tight muscle thing down here and some fascia thing over here, maybe, or something. Now we got a bunch of other things going on. What else? Well, when I go to lift this arm, not only is the middle delt working, but part of the front and part of the rear delt are working too. So which one would be the problem? Would it be the middle, or the front, or the back, or a little of both, or how much of any, or what? How do we know that? It's weird, right? Let's just acknowledge those are things that are going on. All right, let's keep going. There's a muscle, a rotator cuff muscle called the supraspinatus that lives in here too. And that also plays a role when you lift your arm up. Maybe that's the one, that's the problem, right? Well, the rotator cuff, and we always hear how common rotator cuff problems are, and when you lift your arm, that's the muscle that's working, so that's where the problem has to be. Let's keep going. So when we go to lift this arm, you have muscles, when we lift this bone up, your shoulder blade and clavicle, they also raise. So now we have to look at all the muscles that attach to the shoulder blade and your collarbone that pull them up. We've got all sorts of muscles, from traps and some middle trap, upper trap, some subclavius, some SCM, a whole bunch of stuff in here. So is that the problem? Is it the fact that one of these aren't firing? So we should blame it on that, because I study necks, and that's what I think. You can see how what you study really can cloud or push or point you in a direction to casting blame. It's got to be that. So by the way, when you go to move this arm up, the muscles that would oppose this motion, they're also working. They're also playing a role. They're just not going to bed or being inhibited and shutting down. They're actually playing a role in guiding the bone, guiding it through. I can talk about that more if you want, but they're playing a role of guiding it. So actually, every muscle that attaches this bone on the bottom going downward, that's also playing a role. So now what is it? Or is it back to those muscles down here being too tight? Or are these up here not working? Or, boy, there's a lot going on. So let me just say this. Maybe we should acknowledge an entirely different thought process. And guess what? It's the one that I personally believe in, right? And by the way, we don't need to throw everything else out, right? We don't need to throw out the fact that, hey, there may be something wrong with the structure, so getting in images, that could be a really great idea. Making sure there's no disease in here, that's a good idea. Making sure nothing's torn, that's a good idea. But for some of these other things, something being too tight, or the fascia, or making claims about things that we just can't see, you gotta be careful of that stuff. But think about this. I just told you that a whole bunch of muscles are working. So there's a thought process, which is the following. That communication exists between all these muscles in the entire body, not just in this one spot, but the whole body. And that communication needs to happen, information needs to flow, so that when you want to move a segment, the whole thing collectively can communicate and result in this thing moving. Because all these muscles I already mentioned, they all need to change length to move this. Some need to change length more than others. Some need to get longer while some get shorter. The amount that they pull will change depending on a few things, but the amount of tension that each muscle needs to generate must change by the millisecond depending on the position it's in. It's this whole collective information flow that I look at as a muscle system specialist when I look at people that have pain or sensation issues. It's totally different. So I'm not being driven by, hey, something is tight down here. If the client thinks that something's tight down here, okay, I'm not going to argue with them by any means. I absolutely believe them. They feel it's tight. I'm not going to blame the fact that they feel it's tight for the pain they feel here. There's just something amiss there. What I'm going to do is I want to make sure that their entire muscle system can function at a high enough quality to handle moving this segment under a variety of different circumstances. And it can move it under the requirements that it's being exposed to. Whether that means just moving the arm, or moving the arm with a load, or moving the arm when it's forward, or moving it when it's twisted, or moving it when the head is bent, or moving it when I'm standing or seated. I want to make sure that the muscle system, the only thing that can move you, can work at a high enough quality to make sure that it can move well. Because if it doesn't, if the only system that's responsible for moving you, if that system doesn't move well, it may not feel good when you go to move. So there's an interesting idea, right? Different perspective. If the only system that can actually move you isn't functioning at a high enough quality, it may actually hurt when you try to move. And maybe we should be blaming, potentially, the way you feel on the fact that the system that moves you isn't working so well. Instead of blaming it on some other sensation you have somewhere else, or on something that we just can never really identify anyway, like blaming it on fascia. We have no clue what's happening at the fascial level here, when enough to say that that's responsible for how you feel. So, if you're still in pain, you've had some disease and structural damage ruled out, and you're looking for a different way to look at things, start researching a muscle system specialist. When the time is right, when we're actually able to get out of our homes again and go see people, maybe I can help. Maybe this thought process is one that can get you back in the game.